Hi, I'm Madison Cole. On New Year's Eve, my parents flung open the grand entrance of our Atherton estate and hurled my single duffel bag onto the icy granite driveway. My younger brother, Kyle, stood directly behind them, arms crossed, smirking like he'd just inherited the world. "Let's watch how you manage now, big sister," he sneered. I dragged that duffel through dense, frozen mist. No cash, no vehicle, nothing remaining except the heavy wool coat protecting me from the cold. I stumbled onto a frost-covered park bench inside our gated community, trembling so violently my jaw wouldn't stop shaking. That's when she materialized, an elderly woman, barefoot, skin turning gray-blue, white hair whipping violently in the freezing wind. She appeared as though hypothermia had already begun claiming her. Without hesitation, I stood up, removed my only source of warmth, and draped it around her shivering frame. She grasped my frozen hands, stared directly into my soul, and whispered, "Compassion like yours is rarer than gold." Then she disappeared into the fog. Precisely 90 minutes later, 22 black luxury vehicles arrived in complete silence and barricaded the entire street. The same woman emerged from the center vehicle, same face, but now she wore a floor-length charcoal cashmere coat, hair styled in an impeccable French twist, sapphires gleaming at her throat. She walked directly toward me, smiled, and spoke only one sentence. "I've been observing you long enough to understand exactly who you truly are." If you've ever been discarded by the people who should protect you most, drop "been there" or the city you're watching from in the comments so I know I'm not alone. Trust me, keep watching. What happens next will absolutely blow your mind. That afternoon, I was still reeling from the termination email that arrived at 9:30 a.m. Another round of organizational restructuring at the Seattle design firm I dedicated 7 years to. I packed my desk succulent into the front seat of my 13-year-old Toyota Camry and pointed it north on Highway 101 toward Atherton. 2 hours, 18 minutes if traffic cooperated. It didn't. I'd already contacted Mom from the office parking lot. "Just need to stay for a few weeks while I regroup," I told her. She sounded preoccupied, mentioned dinner was at 8, and disconnected abruptly. When I drove through the security gates, the residence looked like something from Architectural Digest. 18-foot Douglas fir in the double-heighted entryway, imported white peonies everywhere, the catering staff in formal black attire arranging the dining table for 25 guests. Dad, Robert, was uncorking a 2008 Cristal like it was routine. Mom, Catherine, was fastening a new Mikimoto pearl necklace that definitely hadn't existed last month. And Kyle, my 29-year-old brother, was strutting in designer Tom Ford, flashing an 8-carat emerald-cut diamond on his pinky finger like he'd been anticipating this exact moment his entire existence. Melissa, my ex-girlfriend of 5 years, stood beside him with her arm linked through his. I dropped my keys in the crystal bowl near the entrance and attempted a smile. "Hey everyone, rough day at the office." That was all I managed to articulate. Kyle spun around, eyes wide with theatrical concern. "Oh my God, seriously?" he gasped, loud enough for the catering staff to hear. "4th position in 5 years, correct?" He turned toward Mom. "Remember when she got terminated from that boutique agency in Pioneer Square for not meeting client expectations?" Mom's expression tightened. Dad didn't even acknowledge my presence, focused on his champagne. I felt my face burning. It was a company-wide reduction. They eliminated the entire design department. Kyle waved his new ring in my direction. "Melissa just secured Series B funding, $32 million valuation. Investors are obsessed with her vision." Melissa gave me that identical, condescending half smile she used when she ended things 3 years ago with, "It's not you, it's our trajectories diverging." Dad finally set his glass down. "Madison, we need to discuss something important." He didn't gesture for me to sit. He never did when delivering bad news. He informed me directly. Last month, he'd restructured the family trust. Everything, $45 million in principal, was now exclusively in Kyle's name. Irrevocable, signed, notarized, filed with the estate attorney in Menlo Park. He said I was 34, capable, and it was time I established independence. Mom added, We cannot continue subsidizing a lifestyle that doesn't generate meaningful outcomes. As if my salary had ever funded their peonies or Kyle's Patek Philippe collection. I stood there, mouth open, attempting to process that my own parents had just legally disinherited me while I was still standing in their entrance hall. Kyle pulled out his phone, already recording. "This is content gold," he laughed. "Big sister returns home broke on New Year's Eve. Say something for my subscribers." I looked at Dad. "You're serious about this?" He met my eyes for the first time all evening. Cold. Definitive. "You have 30 minutes to collect what you need. Security will allow you back tomorrow for the remainder if you schedule an appointment." Mom wouldn't even look at me. She busied herself adjusting a crystal ornament on the massive tree. I walked upstairs mechanically. The bedroom I'd occupied since I was 12 still displayed my high school debate team trophies on the shelf. I threw jeans, 3 sweaters, laptop, and essentials into the old Burberry Weekender Kyle hadn't claimed yet. Everything else, books, journals, the framed UC Berkeley diploma, would have to wait. When I returned downstairs, Kyle was live on TikTok narrating like a nature documentary. And here emerges the prodigal daughter with one pathetic duffel. Any predictions on how long before she's sleeping in that Camry? Dad opened the entrance himself. The fog had descended thick. I couldn't see beyond the driveway. Temperature was already plummeting below freezing. I stepped across the threshold. Behind me, Kyle called out, sweet as venom, "Happy New Year, Madison. Try not to freeze to death." The door sealed with a soft, expensive click. The alarm system beeped 3 times as it armed, and that was it. In under 40 minutes, I transitioned from daughter to trespasser in the only home I'd ever known. I stood on the granite steps in the darkness, one duffel at my feet, wearing the only warm thing I still possessed, that heavy wool coat. The second that massive door closed behind me, everything went silent except the blood roaring in my ears. I stood on the empty cul-de-sac, attempting to breathe, but the air felt like razors. My mind kept replaying Dad's monotone voice, $45 million gone with one signature, and Mom refusing to acknowledge my existence. I was 34 years old, and in one conversation, I had become invisible to the only family I'd ever had. I started walking, because remaining stationary felt worse. The wheels on the duffel rattled across the perfect asphalt, the only sound for blocks. Every mansion I passed had warm amber windows and celebration sounds spilling out, Christmas lights still twinkling behind gated properties. Each one reminded me I no longer belonged anywhere. My fingers were already numb. I kept thinking, this can't be real. Any moment, Mom would open the door and call me back, say it was a cruel test. But the alarm stayed armed, no footsteps, nothing. I don't know how long I walked, maybe 30 minutes, maybe longer, until I found myself in the small public garden beside the old Presbyterian church. There was one wrought iron bench under a streetlight that actually functioned. I collapsed hard, dropped the duffel handle, and finally let the tears come. I cried for the little girl who used to hide under that 18-foot tree waiting for midnight on New Year's. I cried for every achievement where Kyle got the bigger celebration and I was told to be grateful for acknowledgement. I cried because I had always believed that if I just worked harder, accomplished more, they would finally see me. Turns out, none of it mattered. I wasn't disposable because I failed. I was disposable because I wasn't Kyle. The tears froze on my cheeks. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared at the pavement, trying to calculate how I was going to survive the night, let alone the rest of my existence. That was when I heard the slow shuffle of bare feet on concrete. I looked up and saw her, an elderly woman shuffling toward the bench. White hair tangled and wild, thin shoulders hunched against the wind, skin so pale it looked translucent under the streetlight. She stopped several feet away, swaying slightly, and spoke in a voice rough from cold. "Young lady, do you know if any of the warming centers still have capacity tonight? I've been walking up from Redwood City. Everything's at capacity." I wiped my face quickly. "I'm sorry, I don't have anywhere either." She studied me for a long moment, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. Then she lowered herself onto the bench beside me, maintaining careful distance. We sat in silence while her breathing steadied. I noticed her feet were bare and already turning purple, heading toward that terrifying white that means permanent damage is imminent. Something inside me fractured. Here was someone who had even less than I did tonight, and she was still polite enough to ask instead of demand. I felt ashamed of my own self-pity. Without speaking, I stood up, removed the only thing preventing me from freezing, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked startled, then closed her eyes as the warmth enveloped her. Her hands, thin, veined, and trembling, reached up and pulled the fabric tighter. She turned to me, tears shining in those pale gray eyes. "What's your name, child?" "Madison," I answered, voice breaking. She repeated it softly, like savoring something precious. "Thank you, Madison." Then she did something I'll never forget. She took both my ice-cold hands in hers, squeezed once, and held my gaze for an extended moment. No words, just understanding passing between two strangers who suddenly weren't strangers anymore. After what felt like forever, she released me, stood with new steadiness, and gave me the smallest smile. She walked away slowly, swallowed by the night before I could think to call after her. I sat back down, alone, colder than I had ever been in my life, teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. But for the first time since that door closed, the pain in my chest felt different, lighter, like giving away the last thing I had somehow gave me something back I didn't know I was missing. The motel room smelled like stale smoke and industrial disinfectant. I had been staring at the same LinkedIn page for hours, applying to anything offering above minimum wage, when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Miss Madison Cole? This is Rebecca Foster calling on behalf of Mrs. Victoria Ashford. She would like to meet you immediately." I laughed out loud, actually laughed, because it sounded like a scam. Who is this really? The line stayed silent for 3 beats. "Mrs. Ashford will explain everything. A car is waiting outside room 217. I looked through the peephole. 22 identical black Mercedes S-Class vehicles lined the cracked parking lot like a diplomatic convoy. The lead car's rear door opened automatically. I grabbed my phone and walked out in the same jeans and hoodie I'd worn for 3 days. She was waiting in the center vehicle, the woman from the bench, hair now in a flawless low chignon, charcoal cashmere coat cinched at the waist, sapphire earrings catching the light. She looked 76, going on timeless. "Madison," she said gently, as if we were old friends. The door closed with a soft thud. The partition rose. We pulled away. 30 minutes later, the dates opened to a 1930s Spanish colonial mansion on a quiet cul-de-sac in Woodside, hidden behind sequoias and a 12-foot hedge. I had driven past this street countless times and never knew it existed. Inside smelled of sandalwood and gardenias. A fire crackled in a stone hearth large enough to stand in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private vineyard. She motioned for me to sit on an ivory sofa that probably cost more than my annual salary. A house manager poured tea neither of us touched. "My full name is Victoria Ashford," she began. "My late husband founded Ashford Global Properties. When he passed 14 years ago, I took the company private and converted the profits into the Ashford Legacy Foundation. We own or finance over $520 million in commercial real estate across North America. The foundation distributes approximately $145 million annually." I just stared. My brain couldn't process the numbers. She leaned forward. "Every New Year's Eve for the last 28 years, I do one thing identically. I leave the estate dressed as someone who has nothing. No visible security, no phone. I walk until I find someone who still possesses compassion when they believe no one is watching. Most years, I walk all night and return home disappointed. This year, I found you. She explained that after I walked away, her security team, plain clothes, parked 3 blocks away, had maintained surveillance on me for 72 hours. They watched me check into the motel with cash, survive on vending machine food, apply to 63 jobs in one session, cry in the shower, and never once attempt to discover who the homeless woman was or publicize the good deed. "You're the first person in 17 years," she said quietly, "who gave away the last thing keeping them alive without expecting anything in return. I need to know if that was a fluke or who you fundamentally are." She stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. "I have no children, no heirs. When I'm gone, strangers on a board will decide where my resources go. I don't want that. I want someone who understands what it feels like to be discarded on New Year's Eve to decide how we help the next person who gets discarded." She turned to face me. "I'm offering you a residence here, a salary, and a 6-year apprenticeship. If at the end you're the person I believe you are, the foundation becomes yours to direct, not a gift, a responsibility." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Why me?" was all I managed. "Because," she said, eyes suddenly fierce, "I know exactly what it feels like to sit on a freezing bench with nowhere to go and still choose kindness. I was 31 when my own father did it to me. I promised myself if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure no one who chose right in that moment stayed lost." She extended her hand. "So, Madison Cole, will you come home with me?" I moved into the West Wing the following Tuesday. My new bedroom was larger than my parents' entire main floor, with French doors opening onto a meditation garden I could actually smell from bed. Rebecca Foster, tall, auburn-haired, zero tolerance for nonsense, handed me a leather portfolio, the thickness of a dictionary, and said, "Welcome to intensive training." The first month was relentless. 5:30 a.m. swimming laps in the estate pool with Victoria's former Olympic trainer, 7 a.m. breakfast briefings where I learned to analyze a 990 tax return faster than most forensic accountants, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. sitting beside Victoria in board meetings at the Foundation's offices on University Avenue, taking notes while tech billionaires debated impact measurement methodologies. Evenings were spent examining 25 years of grant archives until my vision blurred. Victoria didn't want another privileged person playing philanthropist. She wanted someone who could transform resources into transformed lives without wasting a cent. Her favorite line became, "We don't provide charity. We don't even provide opportunity. We dismantle the systems that create need in the first place." She enrolled me in Berkeley's Executive Leadership Program for Nonprofit Innovation, full tuition covered, no questions asked. 4 nights a week, I drove the 40 miles to campus, sat in seminars with executives twice my age, and learned how to measure systemic change instead of superficial metrics. Weekends meant field research, domestic violence shelters in West Oakland, youth development programs in East Palo Alto, veteran transition housing in the South Bay. I interviewed mothers who escaped trafficking with nothing but their children and a trash bag of belongings. I listened to formerly incarcerated teenagers explain how one mentorship relationship prevented recidivism. Every story carved itself into me. Back at the estate, Rebecca drilled me on governance strategy, how to manage a conflicted board member, how to decline a congressman's pet project without jeopardizing federal grants, how to terminate a grantee caught misappropriating funds without triggering regulatory scrutiny. I redesigned the entire grant evaluation system from scratch: shorter applications, faster decisions, mandatory site visits within 45 days of approval. Victoria reviewed every draft and covered them with corrections, then made me defend each modification in front of the full board. There were nights I fell asleep at the library table with my face on financial projections. There were mornings I cried in the shower because I felt like an imposter who would never measure up. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered sitting on that freezing bench with nothing, and I persisted. July arrived hot and sudden. One Friday morning, Victoria texted, "Study, now." I walked in expecting another marathon strategy session. Instead, she was alone, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, holding a single folder. She didn't sit. She slid the folder across the mahogany table and remained standing. Inside was an employment agreement on heavy cream stock. Title: President and Chief Executive Officer, Ashford Legacy Foundation. Reporting line: directly to the board, meaning her until she decided otherwise. Base salary: $210,000. Equity: 4% stake in the foundation's endowment, currently valued at just under $5 billion. Authority: full decision-making power over all programs starting year 4, subject only to fiduciary duty. I looked up, speechless. She finally sat, folding her hands like she was praying. "I didn't bring you here because you gave away a coat," she said. "Anyone can be generous for 5 minutes when a camera might be watching. I watched you for 6 straight months. I watched you fight for a transgender youth shelter that every banker in the room wanted to defund because the optics were complicated. I watched you sit on a metal folding chair in Richmond until 1 a.m. listening to a 19-year-old mother explain why she couldn't leave her abuser. I watched you rewrite an 85-page policy manual because one clause would have excluded undocumented families from housing." Her voice cracked just once. "You have the strategic mind I need and the moral compass I lost decades ago. The foundation is yours to lead. I'll stay on the board to keep the old guard honest, but day to day, the mission belongs to you now." I tried to say thank you, but nothing came out. She waved it off. "Sign it before I change my mind and make you finish the endowment compliance module first." I laughed through tears and signed. That evening, we opened a 1985 Chateau Lafite Rothschild on the terrace, just the two of us, watching the sun drop behind the sequoias. She raised her glass. "To the woman who had every reason to become bitter and chose compassion anyway." I clinked mine against hers. "And to the woman who refused to let one good deed stay Lizable." We drank. For the first time since New Year's Eve, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. November smelled like wet eucalyptus and ambition in San Francisco. I was in my corner office on the 24th floor of 555 California Street, reviewing final numbers for the Safe Haven campus, when Rebecca knocked once and opened the door. "Your brother and Melissa Chen are downstairs. No appointment." I felt my stomach drop the way it used to when Kyle borrowed my laptop in college and returned it with a cracked screen. "Tell security to send them up." They walked in looking like they'd rehearsed the performance during the elevator ride. Kyle wore a modest charcoal suit instead of his usual streetwear, hair conservatively styled, minimal accessories. Melissa had traded the power suits for a modest navy dress that almost looked humble. Both carried the tight smiles of people who had practiced contrition in the mirror. Kyle spoke first, voice soft, eyes shiny. "Madison, I've been terrible. We've been terrible. I'm so sorry for everything. For New Year's Eve, for the things I posted, all of it." Melissa nodded vigorously. "We're planning to get married next summer, trying to build something real this time." I stayed behind my desk, hands folded, and waited. Kyle took a breath. "Dad's in serious trouble. Some investments collapsed. He and Mom might lose the estate. And Melissa's new company, Blockchain Solutions for Healthcare, just needs $2.5 million to close the Series C round. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't desperate." I raised an eyebrow. "Which part is desperate, Dad's mortgage or your valuation?" Melissa forced a chuckle. "Look, I understand. You're running things now, but family is family, right? $2.5 million is negligible to the foundation." I leaned back. "Tell me what happened to the $45 million trust fund you acquired last January." Kyle's mask flickered. "We diversified. Crypto, NFTs, a few angel investments Melissa's network was running. It was projected to 15x. Then Terra Luna imploded, Celsius froze withdrawals, and most of it's gone. Melissa jumped in. Market correction happens to sophisticated investors. Andreessen Horowitz lost billions too. We just need bridge financing. I opened the folder Rebecca had quietly placed on my desk. Screenshots, bank records, a TechCrunch article titled Cole Family Heir Loses Fortune on Speculative Tokens. I turned the folder so they could see. 91% gone in 13 months, I said calmly. You bought matching Teslas, put a deposit on a penthouse in Miami Beach, and paid influencers to promote worthless tokens. That's not a market correction. That's financial arson. I pressed the intercom. Security to 24, please. Melissa tried sweet reason. Come on, Madison, $2.5 million is rounding error here. You'll never even notice it. The door opened. 2 guards in suits stepped in. I stood. This foundation exists for people who never had a safety net, not for people who incinerated theirs and now want mine. You're not getting a penny. Not today, not ever. Kyle went crimson. You ungrateful... He was already pulling out his phone, hitting record as the guards took his elbows. By the time they reached the lobby, 4 paparazzi vans and a tech gossip blogger were waiting outside the glass doors. Someone had tipped them off. Kyle went full performance. Tears, trembling voice, shouting about cold-hearted sibling abandoning her own blood. The video hit Instagram within 15 minutes. Caption: My billionaire sister won't even help our parents keep their home. Hashtag family first, hashtag toxic siblings. It exploded. 12 million views in 7 hours. Then the internet did what the internet does best. Old classmates posted yearbook photos of Kyle pouring soda on my laptop senior year. Someone found the TikTok live from New Year's Eve where Kyle laughed while I carried out my duffel. A former family assistant went on record about the way Kyle used to lock me out of the house during rainstorms as entertainment. The comments flipped from sympathy to pitchforks. Hashtag Cole Family Exposed trended higher than the original video. Melissa's seed round deck leaked. Someone at the foundation accidentally forwarded it to a journalist. Turns out the blockchain healthcare startup was 85% vaporware and 15% her cousin's garage experiment. Investors ghosted. Kyle's wedding venue canceled. He hadn't paid the deposit. Their engagement announcement post got ratioed into oblivion. I never posted a single word. By midnight, the video was flagged for harassment, the blogger issued a groveling apology, and Kyle's follower count had dropped by 60%. Rebecca poured me a finger of bourbon when I returned to Woodside that night. Poetic justice tastes better when you don't have to orchestrate it, she said. I raised the glass to the dark window. No, I answered. It tastes like closure. December brought cold fog that never quite lifted. The news broke on a Wednesday. Horizon Capital Management collapses. $5.1 billion fraud uncovered. Dad had moved every remaining dollar, mortgage refinance, home equity line, even Mom's jewelry into the fund 8 months earlier because the guaranteed 22% annual return would restore our position. The SEC raided the offices in Newport Beach the same week. The founder was already on a yacht somewhere off the Cayman Islands. 45 days later, the foreclosure notice appeared on the Atherton Estates front gate. No bidders appeared at the auction. The bank took title. Robert, Catherine, and Kyle moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on El Camino Real in Mountain View, California. Rent, $3,200 a month, all they could afford after the bankruptcy filing. Kyle's credit cards were maxed at $284,000, mostly on luxury goods and lifestyle branding. After the November disaster, collection agencies called nonstop. They appeared at the foundation without an appointment on a rainy Tuesday morning. Security called up. I told them to allow all 3 in. Dad looked 20 years older, hair completely silvered, shoulders curved inward, wearing a blazer 3 sizes too large. Mom had cut her hair short and dyed it a cheap box brown that didn't quite match. Kyle wore no designer labels, eyes puffy, clutching a knockoff messenger bag like a lifeline. I met them in the small glass conference room on 24. No water, no coffee. Rebecca stood outside the door. Dad spoke first, voice cracking on every word. Madison, you're my daughter. I know we hurt you. I know we don't deserve anything, but we have nowhere else to turn. The lease ends in 8 weeks. We're going to be homeless. Mom stared at the table, shredding a tissue. Finally, Kyle looked up, eyes red. Please, just enough to get us a fresh start. We'll sign anything. We'll never ask again. I opened a slim black folder and laid 3 business cards on the polished wood. First card, David Nguyen, certified financial planner specializing in post-bankruptcy recovery. Second card, Financial Empowerment Center, free 10-week program funded by the foundation, held at the Mountain View Community Center. Third card, Crisis Support Network, California Crisis Hotline, and a local therapist accepting sliding scale clients. I pushed the cards toward them. This is what the Ashford Legacy Foundation can offer strangers who lost everything through no fault of their own, I said, voice level. It's the same support we provide anyone who walks in here broke and frightened. Dad's hand shook as he reached for the cards, then stopped halfway. That's it? After 34 years, that's all you have for your own father? I stood. You had choices. You chose to restructure the trust. You chose to chase returns that sounded fraudulent. You chose to stay silent when Kyle humiliated me for entertainment. Those were your decisions, not mine. Mom finally looked at me, tears streaming. We were wrong. We're so sorry. I met her eyes for the first time in almost 3 years. I believe you're sorry now, I said. But sorry doesn't rebuild a life. Work does. Courage does. Taking responsibility does. Kyle started sobbing, loud and messy. You're enjoying this. You want us to suffer. I walked to the door and held it open. No, I answered. I just refuse to fund your suffering anymore. Security escorted them out. Dad never looked back. Mom whispered, I'm sorry, one last time as the elevator doors closed. Kyle kept crying until they reached the lobby. Rebecca handed me a tissue I didn't realize I needed. They'll survive, she said quietly. People who hit bottom either stay there or start climbing. You just gave them the only ladder we're permitted to give. I nodded, watching the rain streak down the windows. For the first time, the ache in my chest was gone. Not replaced by joy, just by space, room to breathe. The sky over East Palo Alto was the color of pewter on opening day. Safe Haven rose like a promise kept, 5 stories of glass and sustainable timber wrapped around a courtyard where children were already playing between planter boxes full of herbs and vegetables. 3,500 people filled the plaza. Families who would live here, donors, city council members, every major network, even the lieutenant governor cutting the ribbon. I stood backstage in a simple navy suit, heart hammering louder than the youth orchestra warming up. Rebecca squeezed my hand once. Victoria, elegant in winter cream, gave me the smallest nod from the front row. This was the project I had bled for, 250 permanent supportive apartments, on-site health clinic, workforce development center, early childhood education facility, rooftop urban farm, and a policy that no one would ever be turned away for lack of documentation. The mayor finished his speech. The crowd roared when my name was called. I walked to the podium. The microphone felt heavier than any trust document I had ever signed. I looked out over the sea of faces. Near the back, almost hidden behind a pillar, stood Robert, Catherine, and Kyle. Dad wore an old navy peacoat that hung loose on his diminished frame. Mom clutched a paper coffee cup like it might vanish. Kyle had cut his hair short and looked strangely small without the armor of luxury brands. I let the silence settle for 4 full seconds. 1 year ago tonight, I began, voice steady, I was thrown out of the only home I'd ever known, with 1 duffel bag and nowhere to go. I learned that night what it feels like when the people who are supposed to catch you drop you instead. A ripple moved through the crowd. Cameras zoomed. I also learned something else on a freezing park bench. Real family isn't DNA. Real family is the stranger who chooses to see you when you're invisible. Real family is the hand that reaches when you have nothing left to give in return. I turned and gestured to the building behind me. This is Safe Haven. 250 families will never again have to sleep in their vehicles because a landlord raised the rent. Children will never again do homework in parking lots because the utilities got shut off. And every single person who walks through those doors will be told the same thing I needed to hear that New Year's Eve. You are not disposable. You are not alone. You are home. The applause started slow, then exploded. People stood, phones rose like a wave of light. I waited for it to crest, then spoke softer, so every microphone strained to catch it. Tonight, we open these doors for every person who has ever been told they don't belong, especially for those who were told it by the people who were supposed to love them most. I looked straight across the plaza, directly at the three figures in the back. Dad's shoulders shook. Mom covered her mouth. Kyle stared at the ground. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply held their gaze for one heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. Then I stepped away from the podium. The lieutenant governor cut the ribbon. The youth orchestra played. Children rushed forward with flowers. Reporters shouted questions I pretended to not hear. I walked down the steps, through the crowd that parted like water, and headed for the main entrance. Robert tried to step forward. Madison. I kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just forward. Mom reached out a hand that never touched me. Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time in his life, said nothing at all. I passed within 3 feet of them without breaking stride. The massive timber doors of Safe Haven opened automatically as I approached. Warm light spilled out onto the concrete. I crossed the threshold. The doors closed behind me with a soft, final sound. I never looked back. Not because I hated them, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door that hurt you. Sometimes it simply means walking through a new one and letting the old ones stay closed. Inside, a little girl in a unicorn jacket tugged my sleeve. "Are you the lady who built this place?" she asked. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "I'm one of them," I said. She offered me a dandelion she'd picked from the courtyard. "For you, because you gave us a home." I took the flower, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled like I meant it. Outside, the celebration continued. Inside Safe Haven, the future began. If this story made you question what family really means, hit that subscribe button right now. And if you believe people deserve second chances, but not at the expense of those they've already hurt, smash that like button, because I share real stories about people who chose themselves over toxicity every single day. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been financially or emotionally cut off by family? What was the moment you knew you had to walk away? I read every comment, and your story might help someone else find the courage to leave. Remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who only valued you for what you could provide. Real family lifts you up. They don't throw you out. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Let's expose family betrayal together. See you in the next one. Stay strong out there.